Imagine hiking alone in the Appalachian Mountains. Endless trees, complete silence, and a trail that feels like it hasn't seen another soul in years. People say these mountains hide more than just wildlife. Some vanish without a trace. Others return changed forever. One hiker discovered that when night fell, he wasn't as alone as he thought. He set out with the kind of lightness only someone venturing alone into the wilderness can feel. A backpack full of gear, a folded map in his pocket, and a clear goal in mind. 3 days completely cut off from civilization. The Appalachian Mountains always seemed like a place to rediscover silence. Dense forests, old trails, endless ridges, it all made him feel as though he had stepped back 100 years. The first miles of driving passed quickly, but the deeper he went, the more it felt like he was crossing into another world. The road was almost empty. No cars for long stretches, only birds resting on sagging power lines. When he passed the first cluster of abandoned houses, his stomach tightened. The wood was gray and rotting. Roofs had caved in, windows were boarded shut. Stairs led nowhere. Doors dangled on rusted hinges. They looked so deserted, he couldn't believe anyone had lived there for decades. But then he noticed movement. In the yard of one collapsing house stood an old woman. She wasn't like a neighbor tending her garden. She seemed out of place. She pushed an ancient manual lawnmower, but the moment he drove past, she froze. Her head turned toward him, eyes locked on his. No wave, no smile, just a long, motionless stare that followed him until the road curved and she disappeared. It was unsettling, but he tried to shrug it off. Maybe just a local, maybe nothing, yet deep down, unease lingered. He had come to the mountains searching for peace, but before even setting foot on the trail, something inside whispered he wasn't welcome. And he had no idea that this was only the beginning, and that night would bring something far worse. By the time he parked at the old trailhead and swung the pack onto his shoulders, the sun was already slipping toward the horizon. The forest swallowed his footsteps with a heavy stillness. The trees grew so close together, they blocked out much of the fading light, and every rustle of leaves blended with the sound of his breathing. After an hour of hiking, he found a small clearing where he could pitch his tent. It wasn't ideal. The ground was slightly sloped, bushes crowded the edges, but exhaustion outweighed caution. He unpacked, built a small fire, and opened a tin of food. At first, everything seemed calm. The woods quieted, birds disappeared, and night fell the way it only does, far from towns or roads. Thick, absolute. Then came a whistle, soft, short, like someone signaling from a distance. He frowned, telling himself it had to be a bird. But minutes later, another whistle echoed, this time from the opposite side. His pulse quickened. The sound wasn't coming from one direction. It was moving, first to his left, then behind him, then directly in front of the tent. He sat frozen, listening. Silence stretched on. Just when he started to believe he had imagined it, he heard crunching leaves, footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling his camp. The hairs on his arms rose. He grabbed his flashlight and snapped it on, sweeping the trees with a shaking hand. The beam caught trunks, branches, and empty ground. Nothing else, but the certainty that someone had been there stayed with him. He forced himself back inside the tent, zipped it shut, and lay down with his knife under the blanket. He whispered over and over that it was just animals. Deep down, he knew he was lying to himself, and the night was only beginning. Morning brought only a faint gray light filtering through the thick canopy, but with it came a fragile sense of relief. He unzipped the tent and froze. The fabric was smeared with streaks of dried mud, as if filthy hands had pressed against it in the night. His stomach lurched. Stepping outside, the unease deepened. His backpack wasn't where he'd left it. It had been dragged a few feet away, the top flap open, gear scattered across the ground as though someone had rummaged through it. Nothing was stolen, yet the violation was unmistakable. But the worst part sat by the fire pit. A six-pack of beer. It hadn't been there the night before. Of that, he was certain. The cans gleamed in the weak morning light, neatly stacked, untouched. He stared at them, pulse pounding. Who would sneak into someone's campsite, creep inches from a sleeping person, and leave something like this, and how had they vanished without a single sound? His first thought was that it had to be a cruel joke, some hiker messing with him. But who would risk sneaking so close in total silence? Who would want him to wake up to this? The more he thought about it, the more it felt like a message, proof that someone was watching, that every step he took was being observed. He forced himself to gather his things, but his movements were stiff, mechanical. Each time he looked at the trees, he imagined eyes staring back. Still, pride and stubbornness kept him from turning around. He pressed deeper into the forest, even as his gut told him he was walking into something he didn't understand. And as the second night fell, the truth began to show itself. The second evening should have been simple. Just a few more miles, a quick meal, and sleep. He found a clearing beside a narrow stream and set up camp, trying to convince himself that last night had been nothing more than his nerves. The tent went up fast, the fire burned low, and darkness settled like a heavy curtain. But soon the woods grew unnaturally still, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until every breath sounds too loud. Lying inside his tent, he waited for the usual forest chorus: wind, crickets, maybe the rustle of small animals. Instead came the sound he dreaded, a faint shuffle, then a deliberate step, another, and another. Someone was circling his tent. The rhythm was slow, almost measured, like a predator pacing around prey. His hands slid beneath the blanket, closing around the knife handle. The grip trembled in his fist, sweat dampening his palm. The steps stopped just outside the entrance. The nylon walls quivered slightly, though no one touched the zipper. He held his breath, chest tight. Then came 3 sharp knocks, not on wood, not on stone, on his tent. Each strike reverberated through the thin fabric, straight into his bones. He clamped his teeth to keep from gasping. Seconds crawled by. Then the steps resumed, moving away, only to circle back, closer this time, slower, deliberate. It felt less like wandering and more like a cruel game, designed to stretch his fear to its breaking point. And just when he thought it couldn't escalate further, the silence cracked with a whisper. At first, he thought his mind was betraying him, filling the silence with phantom echoes of fear. But then it came again, clear, deliberate, undeniably human. A whisper seeped through the fabric of the tent. Not a mutter, not the rustle of wind, but words, soft and cold, as if meant for him alone. You don't belong here. His blood turned to ice. Every nerve in his body tightened, his heart thudding so hard it felt like it might tear through his ribs. He wanted to believe it was just some twisted hiker trying to scare him. But the voice didn't sound natural. It was flat, hollow, stripped of emotion, like something imitating human speech without understanding it. He froze, praying it wouldn't come again. But it did, louder this time, and from another direction. You don't belong here. The words seemed to multiply, echoing from his left, then behind him, as if several mouths whispered at once. His grip on the knife tightened until his knuckles ached. Logic begged him to stay inside, but instinct screamed that if he didn't move now, he'd never leave. Adrenaline surged. He ripped open the zipper, lunged out of the tent, and grabbed his pack in one motion. The night swallowed him as he ran blindly into the trees. The whisper clung to his ears, repeating, following, until it blurred with the pounding of his footsteps. And as he crashed through the darkness, he realized with horror that he wasn't running alone. He ran so hard his lungs burned, every breath like fire in his chest. Branches whipped his face, roots caught at his boots, but nothing slowed him. Behind him, the forest seemed alive with pursuit. Sometimes it was footsteps, sometimes snapping twigs, sometimes just the overwhelming sense that something was matching his pace, stride for stride. Finally, drenched in sweat, he collapsed against the trunk of a massive oak, trying to silence his ragged breathing. For a moment, there was only stillness. Then it came again, a sharp, piercing whistle. The same sound from the first night, now much closer, like it was calling to him. A shiver raced down his spine. He knew if he stayed, it would find him. He yanked out his phone, desperate for light or a lifeline. The screen stayed black, dead. He was certain the battery had been charged. Panic rising, he dug out his power bank, fumbling with the cord. Nothing. No glow, no spark. Every device drained, as if the forest itself had bled them dry. Fear settled deeper than exhaustion. With no light, no map, no way to call for help, he was reduced to raw instinct. He pushed himself off the tree and ran again, half blind, guided only by faint silhouettes of trunks against the sky. Each pause brought the same dread. When he stopped, so did the presence. When he ran, it followed. The woods no longer felt like trees and earth. They felt like walls closing around him, twisting into a labyrinth he could never escape. And in his chest, a single truth echoed. If he stopped now, he would never see the morning. When the first gray light of dawn crept through the trees, he finally stumbled onto a narrow logging road. His legs felt like lead, his clothes torn and damp, but relief surged through him. He was out of the forest, at least for now. If he could follow the road for a few miles, he'd make it back to his car. He told himself the nightmare was ending. But as he adjusted his pack, something made him lift his head. On the ridge above, framed between the pines, stood a figure, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't another hiker. It wasn't a ranger. It was the old woman he had seen on the very first day, outside those crumbling houses. Even from that distance, he recognized her instantly. The bent shoulders, the gray hair, the way she stood perfectly still, watching. For a heartbeat, he convinced himself it was just exhaustion twisting his vision, a trick of the morning haze. But then her lips curled slightly, almost into a smile. Not kind, not warm. A knowing smile, the kind that told him she wasn't surprised to see him, as if she had been waiting all along. His stomach twisted with dread. Every instinct told him not to break eye contact, but he forced himself to keep moving. Step after step, eyes fixed on the dirt road. He walked without looking back. He knew that if he turned, if he saw her standing any closer, he might never leave those mountains alive. By the time he reached his car, trembling hands fumbling with the keys, he could still feel her gaze burning into him from somewhere deep in the trees. When the engine roared to life, the sound felt like salvation. He sped down the narrow road, every bump in the asphalt rattling his bones, every glance in the rearview mirror, expecting to see her face staring back. Mile after mile passed, but the fear didn't fade. It clung to him, heavier than the pack sitting in the passenger seat. Back in town, he tried telling people what had happened. Some laughed, saying he had spooked himself with campfire stories. Others listened politely, but with disbelief in their eyes. No one wanted to imagine that someone had crept inches from his tent, left strange gifts, and whispered words that didn't sound human. The more he tried to explain, the more isolated he felt. Like the mountains had given him a secret no one else was meant to understand. Yet he knew it was real. The mud smeared on the tent walls, his scattered belongings, the untouched six-pack at the fire pit, all physical evidence he couldn't deny. And that final image on the ridge, the old woman smiling down at him, seared itself into his memory like a brand. It was enough to make him swear never to return to the Appalachians alone. But the story didn't end when he left. Back home, shadows lingered at the edge of his vision. Sometimes, in empty parking lots at night, he felt watched. Other times, a faint whistle drifted across the wind, familiar enough to freeze him in place. Logic whispered it was just paranoia. But deep inside, he knew something from those mountains had followed him back. As he once told a friend who asked if he'd ever hike there again, "You can leave the Appalachians, but the Appalachians never leave you."